hangars 4, 5 and 6, and it's also your route into the toilet complex there, which won't be accessible obviously from the front of the hangars.
Well, the sprint itself is going to be taking place from 11:30 right the way through to 13:45. Now, during that time, you're going to see a range of cars that are really fantastic.
Two speedsters.
Woolsey Hornet Special. Oh.
Yes, names to conjure with, really, right up to the 1959 Berkeley B95.
What gets me, a 1912 BSAH-1. I mean, that thing must be worth a fortune. Absolutely stunning machine. But yeah, blasting down the runway, all after, well, as I said, from 11:30 to 13:45. Magnificent spectacle of cars and motorbikes. And they're rocking the Cell VR flight simulator. Yes. It actually moves.
It's a terrific setup, that. Very well worth going to see.
Very, very clever, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, just a really intelligent way to do a flight simulator. And on the compass swing, behind the SVAS trailer, the UK Junior Gliding Team, you can meet them and have a go in their gliding simulator. And then have a guided tour of their full-size glider as well. So lots to
become a member of that organisation and support the activities here at the collection.
Ooh, running in from the right.
It is, of course, the NHS Spitfire, the PR-11 photo reconnaissance variant from the Aircraft Restoration Company at Duxford pilot Lettice Curtis, and much more recently, in 1986, in one of the flying programme here at Race Day before.
You're absolutely right. We've had the Cassett,
we've had the Cosmic Wind.
Cosmic Wind, yeah. But the Formula One class absolutely fascinates me because you have an absolutely set size of engine, capacity of engine, horsepower, and so on and so forth. And essentially what you're trying to do is build the most minimum drag airframe behind it in order to get the maximum performance from a set engine size. And they are remarkable aeroplanes. They're really quick.
They are, yes. We were expecting, I think it may still be listed in the programme, to see the Rollerson Beta here. Unfortunately, that has withdrawn from the programme, but nonetheless, great to see the Sonoray here parking up alongside the Cassett Kermit, as it's known, the green one out there on the flight line. As the NHS Spitfire rolls out.
Of course, an unbeatable record at Brooklands, because once World War II started, there was no chance of continuing, as a lot of the track was knocked out to build runways, never reinstated after the war. But the Railton is quite an impressive beast. Not a Fraschini that I mentioned, that's one that's well worth going to have a look at when it's done its runs, because it's quite a beast. Following that, we have the legendary Marlene, which is our 1903 de Dietrich. Mobile phone clip from the passenger seat somewhere down near Crawley, and the car was doing about 45 miles per hour at the time, which is well within its capabilities. It was originally built with a full body on it, but Richard Shuttleworth had it rebuilt. There are just too many of them. Car following it is a Grand Prix Sunbeam. And the next one along, the little silver one, is actually an Aston Martin. It's a single seat. So the early vehicles now just...
In 1921, the 16th Lancers were amalgamated with the 5th Royal Irish Lancers, and they moved to India. So that is likely where Richard Shuttleworth would have been sent.
I mean, looking at the one that's now passing me, I mean, you look at the way that people are sat there, you know, and there's nothing in front of them at all. You know, heads are about 3 feet above the bonnet, and you're definitely catching the elements. The reason I have a bit of a problem doing this, of course, is that although all the vehicles have been given numbers and the numbers are stuck on them, the numbers themselves are very small. vehicles when first found were derelict. Many of them have been built up from starting with only a very few components, and very well known back in the early post-First World War period. I have a nice pale blue Type 35 Bugatti just going down past me now as well. The Isotta has managed to inveigle itself into the rest of the group. The yellow number 09 is a very interesting one because, as I recall, that is actually a four-wheeled Barclay. Now, the Barclay was mostly a three-wheeled vehicle in the early 50s, mid-50s. It was one of a whole raft of cycle cars, micro cars, bubble cars, etc., using Villiers engines for the most part. But the larger ones used the Royal Enfield twin, the Meteor engine, Super Meteor engine, and I believe that the four-wheel vehicles do actually have the 700cc Enfield twin. They are, of course, the inevitable Rashford Morgans. No meeting would really be complete without them. And first of the motorcycles are also starting to make an appearance. The first one is the 1940 Aerial Jap Special. It's an aerial motorcycle principally, but it has a 500cc Jap single-cylinder engine. For those of you who don't know the difference, the term Jap does not mean Japanese. The John A. Prestwick Company were sited in Tottenham, actually, in North London for many, many years. In fact, for many years they produced the engines for speedway bikes. Many Rough Superiors had Jap engines, the JTOR and KTOR V twins of 1000cc overhead valve. The machines favoured by Lawrence of Arabia, of course, are mostly Jap powered. But I believe his last one had a matchless engine. I could be wrong, but so I said maybe I should look that up. But the majority of them were Jap powered. In fact, now just sitting across from me, the gentleman in the blue crash helmet is riding a Mark I KTT Velocet. Velocet actually were very innovative in many ways. They were one of the first machines to use an overhead cam. Making special parts for them. Frontenac being one of them. Type 51 Bugatti, just a model that followed the Type 35 into the racing world. And we now have a gaggle of bikes, including the Scott, which is running again. In fact, actually, there were two Scots out, so that one's running fine. Hostage 7 Special. And we now have one of the aero engine cars. That particular V8 was a very popular one for both aircraft and cars.
Which was a navigation training base.
And so, which aircraft types did you train on there?
Oh, Oxfords. What's the other?
The Anson, possibly?
That's right. Yes, Oxfords and three Ansons actually, because
What transpired after that?
different. Initially, it was the original time I liked. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree to very
Why do we see it in our race day display? Well, in uprated and modified form with American-built engines, Yak 11s have been used to some extent in the National Championship air races at Reno in Nevada. Not with the same sort of success as the likes of the modified North American Mustangs, Grumman Bearcats and Hawker Sea Furies, but nonetheless they've regularly been placed among the leading finishers.
And hardly surprising, there's a great big Shvestov ASH-21 radial engine in the nose of this aircraft, 700 horsepower. That gives the aircraft a maximum speed 289 miles an hour. Believe it or not, the cruise is 230.
Basically about half as potent as the Shvetsov Ash-82 of 1850 horsepower, which powered the Yak 3, one of the Yak series of fighters that were the progenitors of the Yak 11. They were built in large numbers under license, including this one, which is, strictly speaking, a Yak C11, C for Czechoslovakia, built as it was by the Lech factory.
Executed hesitation roll there, showing us to dramatic effect the triangular shape of the wings I was talking about, very, very pointy at the tips, and as I said, that gives you some wicked handling near the stall.
These aircraft were among the first Soviet-built types to emerge onto the Western warbird scene as far back as the 1970s. Large numbers were recovered from Egypt, not least in a huge job lot that was brought back to France by Jean Salis and Alain Capel. In fact, that job lot included no fewer than 41 of these aircraft, which arrived in France in 1985, and this aircraft was one of them. It came onto the UK register in 1988. It was owned by Eddie Coventry, in whose hands the aircraft was restored to flight. Then the late Angie Soper owned and operated it for many years. Raced this aircraft competitively in some of the early post-war air races. It flies here. The Spitfire, however, shot past the pilot who had thought he was about to claim first place, Bruin Purvis, in a Percival Proctor. The Spitfire was then entered for a handicap high-speed race at Lymm in Kent later in August 1948, run by the Cinque Ports Flying Club, and in which several other Spitfires were also entered. Leslie Cahoon in the Mark 8 trainer, which is today operated by the Biggin Hill Heritage Hangar. Also, W.J.G. Morgan in a Mark 24 Spitfire entered by Supermarine itself. Cahoon won in the Spitfire 8 trainer. Second was John Cunningham, the de Havilland test pilot, in an early Vampire. Lettice Curtis came home fifth in that event. Distinct aircraft. All of the types in question have some air racing history of their own. Off goes the first of them, the de Havilland DH-51. Now, it's in, of course, the pedigree, because of the three that were built. The second of them was entered in the 1926 King's Cup air race, a couple of years after the type's first flight. However, retired from that event. Now, we've got the Blackbird 2. 120 miles an hour. The first prototype and first production B2s both competed in the 1932 edition of the King's Cup race. Now we have the Parnell Elm, which
in air races as well. Now that's a maximum speed. Oh, just looking it up.
As you do so, the Magister gets airborne, chasing down as the Blackbird for the 1930 King's Cup at Hanworth. None of them were placed. In the 1933 event, the very one we see here with the registration Golf Alpha Alpha Papa Zulu, flown by Flight Lieutenant E. Air, nearly took fourth position but was pipped off the line. And another famous racing exploit was entered by Lieutenant Michael Hansen of the Danish Army Air Service. He flew in the handicap section in which he achieved sixth.
Getting a whole bunch of aeroplanes moaning around a track at low level. The thrills don't work in a way that never really did.
Just getting airborne on Robin DR4000 tug, towing the ASK-28, a very modern, very modern glider.
Research I could find 16 kites, not this one, but 16 others were impressed into RAF service.
Post and then comes up to the vertical. And then the prop is belt driven from the engine bearing the fuselage. Very efficient because it creates very little drag.
Yes, I doubt whether the powered petrol was quite so efficient, because this one, after World War II, was fitted with a 270cc Regal petrol engine, which was a starter motor for a wartime Junkers U-mode jet engine. The first Provost started arriving in RAF service in 1953 with the Central Flying School at South Cerney in Gloucestershire. And subsequent to that, several flying training schools re-equipped. Out of 461 Provosts built, 369 went to the RAF. The others saw service with the air arms of Burma, Iraq, the Republic of Ireland, Malaysia, Oman, Rhodesia and Sudan. Quite a few of those countries use armed versions as light attack aircraft. With the RAF, it was purely a trainer, exposed trainees to a much more powerful and capable machine at that stage of their training than had previously been the case. Very good visibility under that large canopy and with the side-by-side seating arrangement. And it meant that trainees could move on that much more easily to the jet stage with the de Havilland Vampire as well. And some Royal Navy pilots too undertook training on RAF Provosts. Absolute thoroughbred, built for purpose racing aeroplanes.
And the Miles Hawk Speed 6 behind them as well. Oh yes, sorry, I just didn't know. We'll just hold it back. Now you will have seen an aircraft very similar to the Hawk Speed 6 earlier in our mock air race. Of course it's a Miles Magister. Hawk Speed 6, a development of the Miles Hawk family of touring and racing aircraft. Magister military trainer development of race. First of all, new Gold de Havilland Comet away. Speed 6 just being airborne. This must be driving the world's only Arctic aeroplane. And in this I think they're absolutely right. It is a magnificently
But now, the first of our First World War types with air racing connections airborne, and it's the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5A. And this was, of course, one of the great Royal Flying Corps and Royal Air Force fighting scouts of the Great War, the 1914-18 War. But we have it in the show today because, as Tim mentioned, this type has a significant air racing involvement in its background as well. Most of the SE-5As in service with the Royal Air Force, which of course had been formed as an independent service on the 1st of April 1918, had been retired by the end of 1990. Several of them saw post-war use as among the very first skywriting aircraft, and this went for this very example of the Shuttleworth collection. It was purchased new after World War I, having seen some World War I combat service late in the Great War by Major J.C. Savage for skywriting duties. It was far from alone. Savage had quite a fleet of SE-5As. Oxford and Cambridge Air Race 1921 was live.
Now again, a much earlier generation of aircraft, so you've got 200 horse in the nose of this aircraft. Either a Hispano-Suiza V8 or a Woolsey Viper, depending on which version you had. But the maximum seat's only 120 knots, so you haven't quite got the efficiency of design. Of only 10 years later, when horsepower and maximum speed, actually the speed was higher than the horsepower rather than the other way around.
Yes, this one has 200 horsepower Woolsey Viper. Actually, the Air Force hands scored one of the very last aerial victories of the Great War before, as I mentioned, passing into use for skywriting. Joining me now, we have the Sopwith Pup.
Without doubt, one of my favourite aircraft in the collection. A number of aces, including the Sopwith Pup, during the First World War. Even when more modern types entered service, they kept their pups as their personal mounts to go off and do individual missions and so on and so forth, because they were just so lovely to fly.
Now, aerial derby was a phrase much used in the early post-war years to describe competitive events. And pups were involved in some of those very occasions. They were used sometimes for post-World War I air racing, and one is known to have taken part.
The route, it's pretty much the route of the M25, but rather a long time before it was built.
Few jokes about it being rather quick to circumnavigate the M25 by Sopwith Pup.
And it's quicker to circumnavigate the M25 and up.
Between Pup and Dove. In fact, this aircraft, the Shuttleworth Collection Pup, started life as a two-seat civilian Dove and was converted to Pup configuration by Richard Shuttleworth himself in the 1930s.
I've always been a bit confused about this Pup-Dove controversy, because to me, if you look at the fuselage on the Dove, there's an awful lot of snipe in that.
It was a lot sturdier airframe than the team replica joints, but with John Hurrell having landed on in the SE-5A.
Many thanks to John, that was a lovely display of the SE.
Now here we've got an aircraft of a design that forms part of a family of Newport constructions which began with types that were used for air racing rather than seeing that sort of use following their military service. Many different Newports were flown in air races from 1911 onwards. The Newport 10, known as the Bebe, was developed by Gustave Delage for the 1914 Gordon Bennett Cup race at Reims in France, which was cancelled due to the outbreak of war, and it was as a result of that that the design was modified for military purposes.
Very well it did. Led to a whole family of aeroplanes. Newport, the original Bebe was developed in the Newport 11, and then the aircraft you see here, the Newport 17, basically getting slightly bigger and stronger with bigger, more powerful engines.
And what you'll see as it flies past is the rather unusual wing configuration. While it is of course a biplane, it's a so-called sesquiplane, or otherwise known sometimes as a 1.5 wing design, whereby one of the wings, the lower one in this case, as you can see quite clearly, is smaller than the other. On the Newport Scout family, that lower wing has only one spar and is considerably thinner than the two-spar upper wing. There were some structural disadvantages to this layout, but the Newport 17 was still a really fine fighting scout with top speed, high rate of climb, excellent agility.
Now, what's quite interesting is that there was an experimental aircraft.
Before they come back to give individual displays.
The carbon bit, I didn't realise it was only 32 horse. Apparently it's just quoted as 35 all over the place. So an even more remarkable performance considering that. So 90 horsepower Pubjoy Niagara. That's another good British name, isn't it? Pubjoy. Here's the nose of the Compass Swift. A little Warden Micron in the nose of this
5 horsepower, won on its debut in what was to be the last pre-war air race, the 1939 Lim Folkestone Trophy. And that was in the hand.
Every single model of engine between the J4 right the way through to the J17 took exactly the same engine range. Exactly the same engine range. You actually look great to engine. That came from the aeroplane. One job. Very clever bit of marketing. Somebody thought the engineering through.
The Shuttleworth Collection Sea Hurricane getting into the air. We're of course going to, as usual, when there are Merlins involved, keep quiet during the display by the Spitfire and Sea Hurricane. We were hoping to see this aeroplane joined in the air by the Blackburn Type D monoplane. Unfortunately, the wind conditions are just too brisk for the Blackburn to fly today. So hopefully next year it'll be fully 5th time lucky for our intended reenactment of the so-called Wars of the Roses Yorkshire-Lancashire air race of October 1913 between the new Avro 504 design and the Blackburn Type I monoplane. We've been hoping to do that at several race days. I think I said Fly Navy just now. Several race days running. The weather has always precluded it. going to see a solo by one of Navy Row's most outstanding creations, derived from the Avro 500 of 1912, and the future Avro chief designer Roy Chadwick was among those involved in its conception, working on the fuselage. Together, the team turned out a very light design with a rectangular section, box girder fuselage, and equal span, 2-bay wings, 2 seats on board with pilots in the back, and most distinctively of all, the ash landing skid anchored to the fuselage. And numerous aspects of the design were really tested out on the 500, which was used as a trainer soon after the establishment of the new Central Flying School by the Royal Flying Corps, and then again by the Royal Naval Air Service, both of which would feature strongly in the service of the 504. And it was on the 500 that they adopted the comma design of rudder that's so distinctive on the 504 that we saw there. Scott Butler was displaying the 504 for us. Incidentally, in my excitement to tell you the story of the Travel Air D4000 earlier, I totally neglected, I think, unless I didn't, to say that it was flown by Charlie Hugh.
No, that's the first time you've mentioned his name, so yeah.
I thought so, yes.
Your memory is clear.
Charlie at the controls of that aeroplane for us. He was to have flown the Travel Air Type R mystery ship replica, also owned by for the flying display. We're also, of course, going to bring back, and here they come, indeed, the Sea Hurricane and the Spitfire from the right for their break to land. They've just been cool. Showing us something of the excellent handling qualities of the 504, one of the attributes that made it such a great training aeroplane, as well as its use on the front line by both the Royal Flying Corps / Royal Air Force and the Royal Naval Air Service.
In fact, it wasn't until the service was broken, and that was the 504 up until then.
Subsequently, of course, exceeded by the de Havilland Chipmunk,
And the Shackleton AEW.
Certainly the Shackleton would have exceeded it, and the English Electric, absolute favourites in the whole lineup today. Into land then the Sea Hurricane, the only Sea Hurricane still flying in full naval configuration. The Hurricane 10 of the Biggin Hill Heritage Hangar is a former Sea Hurricane, but has been restored as a standard Hurricane. This one still in its maritime configuration, the subject of a lengthy restoration to fly, undertaken largely at Duxford, which was completed in 1995 with a maiden flight. Stu Goldspink at the controls today. All of the airworthy Hurricanes in the UK, I think those, I think you could put 10 up now.
Yep. Do you remember that day?
I do.
I was actually speechless. I was gibbering like a monkey up here on the tower. I couldn't say anything. You had to take it.
Marvellous spectacle. And following it into land, the Spitfire 5C, which was flown by Chris Huckstep.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, next up.
So we're bringing that aeroplane back over because we're going to see the pylons for the extras pylon weaves, it's called, created in a rather unusual way. So we're going to quite apart from what's going on here in terms of aircraft related activities with the collection, there are also regular events through the land art competitions for children also around the parkland here. But now, our final act of the day, Mark Jeffries, multiple British aerobatic champion, with the extra DA330SC.
Now, I said this aircraft was strong. The skin on the tailplane is 0.3 of a millimetre thick. And when you go to the factory in Dinslaken, Walter Extra leads in the cockpit, and he's showing you where all the knobs and taps are. And I've been very fortunate, I've actually gone out and picked one up from the factory. Can you believe that? Brand new aeroplane, they let me fly it. It must have been mad. But anyway, while he's talking to you, you notice his voice is getting further away. You turn around and you see he is now standing on the tailplane of your brand new aeroplane. And he jumps up and down on it to show you just how strong it is. But running in with smoke now, ladies and gentlemen. Mark starting off showing you just what massive performance, that 315 horsepower coming out of the Lycoming engine in the nose. Knife edge flicking on the way down. Incredibly strong aeroplane, stressed to plus and minus 23 G. Steel tube in the fuselage, but that's the only metal other than the engine. That knife edge flick over the top there. You basically kick on full rudder, let the aircraft turn sideways, and then shove the stick all the way forward. So it goes midway red sideways through the sky. Funnily enough, it looks quite a tough manoeuvre, that. It's actually quite comfortable because the aircraft's going round you. So there's not that much G in it. It's a bit weird.
In the early days of the Red Bull Air Race World Championship, extra 300s and derivatives such as this were among the aircraft that we used alongside the likes of the Sukhoi Su-26 and the Budvi Cap 231 and 232 families. Later they were superseded by the rather more modern H540s and MXSs and so forth.
Yeah, but not anymore. Have you seen the new one? Extra 330 NG.
The Extra NG is very, very exciting. A very good tour, I gather, as well.
John Taylor flew one in 4 hours old into Denham the other day. What a piece of kit. Even got an autopilot and a full glass cockpit.
Yes, indeed. They're really impressive, aren't they?
Huh? So you can go touring because you can take £100 of bags behind the scenes. You can go touring, or you can go flying full-on competition aerobatics, which is quite remarkable. Now this isn't an aeroplane you get into, it's an aeroplane you put on. The controls are so light and so well harmonised. It's literally just like an extension of your hands and feet. You don't think about it, you just do it.
But I gather the roll rate can still be quite a shock to the uninitiated, even to an experienced pilot used to flying rather more sedate machines.
Well, we first got a far better aerobatics. We first got our first Extra 300s, which were the mid-wing version. And we're pretty shocked to discover the standard aileron roll rate was 360 degrees a second. It was when we started doing flick rolls and we found out it was doing 480 degrees a second. And then we got the low-wing 300L, and that'd be 540 degrees a second. So it's a bit like finding out what your washing felt in the middle of your washing machine on spin cycle.
Very well-known and distinguished vintage aircraft pilot, who I won't name here, but has told this story publicly, got given a flight in Richard Good's Extra 350 in the early 1990s. He tried his first roll, he banged his head on both sides of the canopy and decided, this is not for me.
Yeah, you do have to tense your neck muscles. Your head weighs what? Best part of 7.5 pounds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, keep your eyes on the aircraft. You can see
There go the
gates.
pylons.
Now he's got to thread his way between these, left and right around them. You can see he's actually ignited pyrotechnics on the wingtips of the aircraft as well. There you go, perfect run, absolutely perfect run, left and right around every single pylon. Now in the Red Bull Air Races, of course, they have the big nylon pylons, the big sort of inflated gates. So he's around the first 2, 3, he's using the smoke, the pyros have run out of the ground, smoke at the markers. Nobody made them all again. It's still a bit bright daylight for you to see the streamers from his wingtips clearly, but they are there. Well, that's not something you see every day, is it? Firework gates for a slalom run. These really are incredibly beautiful aeroplanes. When you see the workmanship that goes into these, how aerodynamically clean they are. There's not a screw head sticking out. There's not a joint that isn't perfectly aligned. They are beautifully built machines. You might get the impression I like these aeroplanes. You're absolutely right, I do. But more to the point, I like the people. If you're ever in Dinslaken in Germany and you get a chance to do the factory tour, do. Because it's a riot. The people there are just so happy to be doing what they're doing, and they build some fine aeroplanes. Yeah, knife edging up the vertical. Letting it decay at the top. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Mark Jeff.
And it's with that that we bring our flying programme today to a close, not just for today, but for the 2022 Shuttleworth Collection Airshow season. Whether this is your first visit, or as many of you are, I know, you're a regular, it's been great to have your company here, and indeed at the other events you may have attended over the course of what's been another very memorable season.
Can you believe the year's over? You know, it's weird. This year has just gone by in a flash. We will, however, be having a few departures. Most notably, John Romain's just fired up his Spitfire PL Mark 11 behind us. He's going to be taxiing out to depart in his beautiful low golden light. So you photographers out there, it's a lovely chance to get a fine picture of that aircraft as he departs.
Season.
Premiere show, first weekend in May, I believe, as is usual. But ladies and gentlemen, it only remains for Ben and I to wish you a very, very safe journey home. Do take care out there. And as this is the last show of the season, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And we hope to see you all back here next year in May.
Goodbye for now.